Where did today's spy movies get their start? Well, we have to look no further than Fritz Lang's wonderful 1928 silent movie spy thriller, Spione. If you're an English-speaking person, you may find this movie also called Spies. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Join us as we decode the silent movie Spione and its impact on the genre we all love.
Now, I am so happy that we're finally talking about this movie. I mean, this thing's been on my radar since we started doing this podcast. I knew about it. I'd seen it once a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it's a silent movie, and I know that's not always something everybody wants to watch. But
True.
I think we need to have it here because here at Spy Movie Navigator and Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, we like to talk about how one movie or real life may have influenced another movie. Well, we've focused on movies since the talking movies came out. We never really did anything with any silent movies. But that means we haven't done Spione, and it has influenced most spy movies that followed it.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to bring our discussion of this movie to you. I think that if you're a spy movie fan, this movie should be on your watch list. And I would guess it's a movie you haven't heard of before.
Yeah. Well, Tom, okay. Yeah, sure. I'm excited. I'm excited to see its impact on future spy movies and the genre in general. And that's what I want to focus on here in our discussion of Spione. And I would suggest to our listeners, if they want to gain information about this movie, Spione, this is the place to do it right here on our podcast.
Wait, okay. So are you implying not to watch the movie, just listen to the podcast episode?
That would be a good suggestion, I think,
I disagree with you, but we'll get into that.
All right. Now, yes, we've talked about some of the early spy movies in previous episodes, but those were from the era since the talkies really emerged in 1929 and 1930. Yes, there were a few partial talkies and one or two full talkies before then, but 1929 is when talkies really took off. Spione even predates the Hitchcock spy thrillers from 1934's The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1935's The 39 Steps, 1936's Secret Agent, and the 1938 classic, The Lady Vanishes. We have episodes out on all four of those movies. Now, most of the silent spy movies before 1929 had to do with World War I and spies during the war. So
yeah, and you say the war. I mean, there was even that really excellent Buster Keaton movie, The General.
Yes.
But that was all spies and war. It just wasn't World War I. It was the American Civil War.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And at least it had a train, and Buster Keaton climbed all over the train. So we know it's a spy movie, but it's about the war. And it has a very simple plot. It's only an hour and 20 minutes long.
Nice.
And so Spione is different. I mean, this is
2.5 hours long.
Yeah, it's 2.5 hours long. And it's not a movie about a spy who's loyal to a country and there's a war behind it and everything. This is just a megalomaniac. He's after some papers about a treaty with Japan, which is the MacGuffin to us. And it might be the first MacGuffin in a spy movie. So we have a non-war based spy movie. And this is one of the first ones that I can find any example of where it's something like this.
Yeah, and of course, the name just reminds me of the pre-title sequence in The Living Daylights, when on Gibraltar, the spy who killed one of the 00 slips the note down the rope on the carabiner that says, Schmiert Spionum, death to spies. Okay, so I'm reminded of that immediately. Why we like this movie is that it sets the stage for much of what we still see in spy movies today, almost 100 years later. That is the key of what we're going to be talking about here.
Absolutely, because this thing pretty much started it all. Now,
it did. We
should also say this is an almost 100-year-old movie. So the cinematography, especially around things like the train crash, they're not up to today's standards. However, and I hate the expression for the time, but for the time, it was really well done. And there were some very good reconstructed versions of this that you can find online. Some are grainy, and there are some really excellent ones out there, especially considering the age of the movie.
Yeah, I thought the cinematography was actually quite good, and even thought that the chases and the train crash were pretty well done, actually, I thought. Now, this is a long movie. It's over 2.5 hours. Silent, with piano music playing throughout, and it is tedious, I have to say. And the piano music got on my nerves after about an hour and a half.
Yeah, I was when I told you we were going to do this one, I'm like, oh, Dan's going to hate this part.
And confusing and hard to follow too. So there you go.
the length of this thing sounds like it influenced the lengths of the recent Bond and Mission Impossible movies.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk more about that piano underscore that you were listening to a little bit later, because not everybody gets that version of it.
All right. All right. So in this episode, we're going to give you the high level plot of the movie, and then we'll look at some of the spy movie tropes that we see for the first time in Spione. We'll also look into why this is a great movie in Tom's opinion. I said what I thought. Now, we'll contrast that with some of the reviews that criticize this movie, but let's go.
Dan, if you and I had been around when this thing came out, I bet you would have gone to the theater and loved it.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that it's a silent movie now is something where you have some reading to do because the movie's shown with subtitles. And I know you don't generally like movies with subtitles.
Generally.
And so I'm interested to hear your feedback on this one as we go along, although it sounds like I'm kind of getting it. Now, the other thing is, since this is a silent movie, acting was done differently in a silent movie. You didn't have words to help you. Yes, the actors speak to each other. We don't hear it as the audience. So there's more pantomiming that goes along in the acting.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about this being complex. I mean, the plot is not simple, but I think it's fairly easy to follow given the amount of pantomiming and stuff done, maybe without even having to read the subtitles.
Yeah, no, not for me. No, I did not think I did not think this was easy to follow. Now, you know the bad guy, and I think you kind of think you know who the good guys are, but no, I don't think it was simple to follow. A lot of stuff going on, very fast movement. It is 2.5 hours long. Like you said, hey, when they put this out, they thought, hey, we're going to make this a real feature. And so we're going to do this for the whole 2.5 hours. People will be thrilled. Yeah. Well, they were then, probably 1928. So.
Okay. The plot is definitely more complex than the general was.
Okay,
right?
there you go.
But and we'll talk a little bit about the plot here in a second. But I think this whole experience of watching a 2.5 hour silent movie when we're so not used to that. All right, so I think I already know the answer to this, but this is 2.5 hours. What did you think of that experience?
Yeah. Did we mention that it's a long movie? It's all right. I'm glad you said it's a complex plot, at least, which makes it hard to follow because it's a complex plot.
I
Now,
don't think it's hard to follow. There's just
yeah,
lots of parts to it.
yeah, it's complex. The subtitles in the version I watched were both in German and English. And I thought that there were not, here, Tom, you're going to be surprised. I thought there were not enough subtitles
Wait, who are you?
because I
Where's
wanted to know
Dan?
more of the dialogue. I will say that the actors had to be good because it was silent. And yes, they are animated, like you mentioned, and would be overdone in this. If this was a talkie, their acting would be overdone for sure. So, like I said, I prefer watching a movie rather than reading a movie, but here they actually could have used more subtitles. So,
And back then, that's how they had to have the subtitles. Now,
yeah.
you made something in there in your comment there that was interesting. You said the version I watched.
Yes, yeah.
And so let's go ahead and point out there are a few different releases that you can watch online. And I actually think the first version I saw was a shortened version. So one of the best prints is the full movie clocking in at about 2.5 hours. You
Yeah.
can find it on YouTube. Look for the one put out by Masters of Cinema. There are some shorter versions of this movie available on YouTube as well. But I think, at least for me, watching the full movie allows you to follow the plot better because some of the shorter versions are kind of choppy the way they cut the thing up. Also,
Yeah.
you talked about the piano score. There are
Mhm.
two versions of the scores available. One
Yeah.
is this piano score by Donald Sosa. And as much as I actually think this is a crisper image of the thing, but I actually prefer the versions that have the original score. But that's
Okay.
a
Yeah.
matter of taste. We're recommending the Masters of Cinema one because it's the best visual print of it.
All right. Let's get to the plot time. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So very high level. There's a
Yeah.
businessman, an evil man named Hagi, and he's brilliantly played by Rudolph Kleinroge. And
Yeah.
he wants to get his hands on a treaty that was signed with the Japanese. He has a complex spy network to try to help him meet his goals.
Mm.
When you first see him, he looks quite evil. It's a great opening shot of him.
Yeah.
We get to see him blackmail a woman called Lady Lelaine, and this guy is not pleasant.
No, not pleasant at all.
Unless he's acting as a banker, then he kind of seems to be a little pleasant. But
Yeah, he has
when
two
he's,
roles.
yeah, when he's playing this evil guy, that's not good. And then later we see Hagi bring in his ace in the hole, Agent Sonia Baranikova. In our opinion, she steals the movie.
She does. Here, I agree with that. She fills the screen when she's in the scene. And really, she's a female spy in 1928. And this prefigures the trope of the female femme fatale and the strong, capable female spy. So this is pretty cool. This is 1928.
Yeah, absolutely. She's to me the best part of the movie.
Yeah,
Yeah, she's
absolutely. Yeah.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Now, the government's main agent who's trying to stop him is somebody called Agent 326, played by Willie Fritch.
Hey, all right. Hey, we got a numbered agent in 1928 in a movie. Hey, nice. 007 comes later. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, see, they were just regular agents then. So then there's a 00 program that gets started.
Yeah.
So now you get the 007. Now,
Yeah. All right.
the other
So
thing
there's a
about
trope set here. Oh,
yeah, and
go
there's the other thing that we get here is that this Sonia, who works for Hagi, the evil guy,
Mhm.
falls in love with Agent 326, and he loves her back, even though they're on opposite sides.
Hey, another little trope here for the first time. Some romance in a spy movie.
Well, and
Wow.
when they first start out, though, to be fair, Agent 326 doesn't know she's a spy. But
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to give away too much of the plot.
No, don't give away the whole plot because people are going to be watching 2.5 hours of this.
They should. Now, there's this Japanese focus part of the movie because the treaties with the Japanese,
Yeah.
and something that would get some negative press today if they did it the way they did it. But back then, there were some Asian actors, but the lead Japanese guy was a Romanian actor named Lupu Pick. And the character's name was Dr. Akira Masimoto. And we'll talk a little bit more about him a little bit later. He's got a very interesting role in this movie. And I really like the character, but that character's a little confusing to me more. And again, we'll drill
It
into
is.
this.
It is. Yeah.
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 All right. So,
Very confusing.
anyways, the main plot is Hagi wants these treaty documents. The government doesn't want him to have them. And the agents on both sides fall in love. So
Perfect.
can Hagi get the documents? Does Agent 326 stop him? We don't want to give away too much, so we'll leave that as the high level plot. And if you want to find out, watch the movie.
Yeah, watch the movie. Let's get to the influencers because that's the important thing here. We'll start with the amazing opening sequence. This sequence, albeit short, sets the audience members up that this is a fast-paced movie that will have some great action to it. Now, it is not a pre-title sequence a la Bond, but with it happening just after the opening titles, this thing gets the movie cooking. It sets us up for the rest of the movie very well.
Oh, and I think it's a really fun to watch opening sequence.
Yeah. You see a thief cracking a safe, which is cool already, and a diplomatic pouch is stolen in a drive-by after a shooting.
Which was cool, by the way.
Yeah. And
I
then
mean,
we see
that was pretty cool. You think about how they did that. That was neat.
Yeah, it was. And then we see the villain, Hagi, and then a guy gets shot just as he's going to tell the powers that be what happened. It's the classic, the murderer is, boom, bam. A lot of Sherlock Holmes stuff happened like that. All of this happens in the first 2 minutes of SPIONE. Now, that's a good solid start to the movie, and it makes you want to watch more, kind of. I mean,
Come on, kind of. If that doesn't set you up going like, yeah, this is going to be a fun movie to watch.
yeah. All right. It could have easily been a pre-title sequence, which I would rather it be a pre-title sequence, but it wasn't. They didn't have it then, I don't think. Anyway, go ahead.
I want to recap this for a second. In the first 2 minutes, we see a safe crack, an assassination, documents get stolen, and a guy's killed while trying to spill the beans. Yes, this does sound like a movie that has influenced other spy movies. And if you are a spy fan and haven't yet seen Spione, you've still seen each of these tropes in other movies.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of the villain, Hagi, he seems to have unlimited coverage with the spy network. He has spies everywhere. And he has a very cool looking headquarters or lair, if you will. And he's in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is, I mean, you talk about something that's setting the table for spy movies to come.
Mr. White said that. We have people everywhere.
That's right.
Yeah. In Quantum of Solace. Bits and pieces of Hagi find their way into most spy movie villains. Hagi leads multiple lives. He's the owner of a huge bank and a conglomerate. He's a villain, and there was one more life he leads. We won't spoil it for you, but if you watch the movie, you'll find out. But I think Roger Moore would be proud. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say.
Don't spoil it, Dan.
All right, we can't watch him without thinking of Bond villains like Goldfinger, Zorin, Drax, or Elliot Carver, megalomaniacs who have their evil role hidden behind their legitimate business practices.
And
So,
it starts here in
cool.
Spione.
One cool thing they do with Hagi here is that he has two offices in the same building. When he's acting as the bank manager, he's in a fairly normal looking office. However, when he's in this evil megalomaniac role, he moves to a fairly stark office with a lot of electronics. It's a nice touch that makes it easier for the viewer to understand which role Hagi is playing at the moment. And he smokes a lot, by the way.
Yeah. I do love the two different offices. That's a
Oh my
great
God.
touch.
Yeah. Yeah. Hagi has some very cool gadgets and electronics in his evil
Wait, spy
office.
movies with gadgets and electronics?
Yeah,
Really?
how about that? Yeah, could that have influenced any spy movies? Besides all of his communications equipment, and there was a lot, there's a device that shoots a newspaper at him.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. He's sitting at his desk, he hits his button, and his
Weird.
newspaper comes
Yes.
flying onto his desk.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty advanced office for 1928. And another thing about Hagi that we loved was the deference his employees showed toward him. The first time we see Hagi interacting with people, there are 5 people all bowing their heads as they're there to give him some information. There is this kind of feel the first time we see the Spectre team interact with Blofeld, too. Also, The Godfather has this type of scene a few times, actually, in Vito Corleone's office and at the funerals.
Yeah, the people,
Spe-
it's where the people are showing deference to the leader who could
yeah.
kill.
Yeah, 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 obvious difference. Spione showcased various espionage techniques really for the first time, and early versions of spy gadgets, which we know became a recurring element in later spy movies, is right here, 1928. Wow.
Yeah, now another thing that we see is that we talked about this agent for the government, Agent 326. Now, he comes off as a natty dresser and a man about town, but that's a little bit later in the movie because he starts the movie in a deep cover disguise.
Yeah, a cover.
Absolutely, he's got this cover, and he definitely is not natty looking in this cover, right?
Yeah.
But we get the dashing agent out of him a little bit later on, and that feels in many, many spy movies, not just James Bond.
Yeah.
We also see a turncoat, and this Japanese guy I talked about before, his alliances are never fully displayed.
No.
But above all, we have 2 honey traps in this movie. These are women spies who lure men with their beauty.
Go figure.
They're well played by Gerda Maurus and Leanne Dyers. Now, Maurus has a very large role in the movie. She's the one who plays Sonia.
Yes.
Dyers is a
Crucial.
much shorter, but still an important part of this movie.
Mhm.
And we can see it, the honey trap getting set there. Now, as we mentioned before, this is a spy movie. There's a train scene.
Yay.
Dan, you and I don't know how many times we've said this in episodes. You can't have a spy movie without a train scene. And
Yeah.
we get one here. And in fact, we get a train crash here, but we don't see the physical crash. And this is something Hitchcock was a master at. And I wonder if he got some of this, he trained in Germany, and I wonder if he got some of this from Lang here. The violence is suggested, but we don't see it.
Yep.
Now, in Spione's case, Fritz Lang didn't have a large budget to work with. So his prior movie, Metropolis, was a critical success, but a box office flop. So just showing a hint of the train crash saved a lot of money.
Yeah.
As a side note, at about a 1 hour mark, when Sonia has a meeting, there are several posters for Fritz Lang's Metropolis posted on the walls along the street.
Yeah.
Which, when I see that now, you think,
Mm.
call me Buona.
Call me Buona from Russia with love. Yeah, right. All right.
The director's promoting another movie.
Yeah. All right. Back to the train crash. Now, not showing the crash, actually, I thought works here. But imagine the first Mission Impossible movie without the train crash. We'd be a little disappointed. It cost a lot of money to do the Mission Impossible train scene, but here we get some of the feeling without all of the money being spent. So here it worked for me. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I did too. Now, we mentioned the fact that the violence, you don't see some of the violence or the heavy crash or whatever. And if you want to
Mhm.
see an excellent example of how Fritz Lang has done that as well, check out the excellent movie M, starring Peter Lorre. That movie could have had terrifying, explicit violence against children, but
Mhm.
Lang leaves it to the audience's imagination. Now, the movie was called M, but it has nothing to do with the character M in the Bond movies.
All right, speaking of M, it makes me think of the James Bond character M because here's a little tie-in. Well, there is a character in Spione with the last name Jason. He is played by Craig Hall Sherry. This character is analogous to the character M in the James Bond movies. He is Agent 326's boss, and there is some great interplay between Jason and Agent 326. The dynamic in the Bond series feels similar. Also, if you think of Ethan Hunt's relationship with Mission Commander Swanbeck in Mission Impossible 2, you'll see a resemblance there as well. So, pretty
Yeah,
cool.
now this character, Craig Hill Sherry's performance of this character, Jason,
Oh, yeah.
is it's a silent movie. So his performance is way over the top.
He's
There's a
animated.
lot of overacting when he's trying to show excitement or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
remember, this is a silent movie. Much of the story is told not in words.
Mhm.
That said, I still couldn't help but laughing at some of his scenes with as much as he overplayed some of this stuff. Now, we do see some other spy movie tropes that we see for the first time here. And one of them is a guy committing suicide with what looks like a cyanide capsule. I mean, you don't
Mhm.
see exactly what it is, but it's the way they
Yeah,
always
yeah, yeah, yeah.
portray the guy taking the cyanide capsule
Yeah.
so he doesn't spill the beans. There's a lapel hidden camera, which was tiny. I mean, back at that
Yeah.
time, if that thing somehow worked,
That was forward
that was
thinking.
very and looks a lot like some of the cameras from about 15 years ago when they had the small cameras,
Yeah.
right? There's chase scenes. We
Yes.
have a scene where somebody in a train car looks out the window to an adjacent train, one on the other track, and
Mhm.
sees a person of interest to them parked right next to them. We see the use of montage. And of course, there's some gadgets, as we've mentioned, those communication devices and surveillance techniques that weren't that common at the time.
Yeah.
And the James Bond franchise does an excellent job of doing the same thing.
Yeah, another thing we see in Spione here gets a direct reuse in Hitchcock's The 39 Steps. In the 39 Steps, Hannah gets saved from a bullet by a Bible in his pocket. There's something very similar in Spione. And this was 7 years before the 39 Steps came out. So we have to believe Spione influenced that scene in the 39 Steps.
Yeah, well, and others, right? I mean, that's actually a
Yeah,
fairly common trope, even in westerns, where I
yeah,
had a hip flask in my pocket, or I had a Bible in my pocket, or whatever, and the bullet stops it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Even Back to the Future, they
Yeah.
use that. All right. And since this movie came out before the Hays Code, there is I don't know if I can say it, a 9-second kiss here.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah. Remember in our episode on Notorious, we talked about how Hitchcock got around the 3-second limitation in the Hays Code. The Hays Code is you couldn't have your lips touching for more than 3 seconds. So here, it's a full-on kiss for 9 seconds. Oh my God, the
Oh, I'm
scandal. This is
horrified.
incredible.
I'm horrified.
Horrified.
Yeah, now
How could we watch something like
now
this?
Hitchcock broke this longer kiss into a bunch of smaller kisses with dialogue in between. But here
Very
it is
clever.
a full
Yeah.
9-second kiss. I mean,
Yeah. All
shocking,
right.
positively shocking.
Yes. All right. So those are some of the ways Spione led the way for future spy movies. Let's look at some of the positive things about this movie and even a few more influences here. So Lang, I mean, he was one of the most talked about directors at the time, really. His approach is innovative. Fritz Lang took this approach to storytelling in a unique way. This is a spy drama first, a romance story second, and a thriller last, and in that order. So instead of the big action sequences we see today, the story is more focused on crime and spies. This approach was used by many spy movies that followed it. Lately, however, this focus has changed. We point out when a spy movie focuses on espionage instead of just action in our podcast all the time. It's always a battle between what's selling to the public now, action or espionage.
Action selling, and I prefer the espionage.
Yeah.
Another thing he does here in the way he does his storytelling is many of the plot points are left fuzzy. We don't have all the details as to what happened with this Japanese guy, right?
Yeah.
And
All
we
right.
never
We don't.
quite know why Hagi's trying to do what he does in the movie. And it doesn't really matter. We just know he's doing something evil. He's got a spy network and he's trying to get his hands on this treaty. And that's all it really matters in terms of some of the level of detail. So you can leave plot points fuzzy.
Yeah. And it works. And I think there's a lot of memorable scenes despite that there's some fuzziness to this. It's a positive for Spione. And here, I'm not sure that there are as many memorable scenes as like in Lang's prior work, Metropolis, as you mentioned, but there are plenty here in Spione. For instance, we see 3 suicides, all by different
Yeah,
methods.
that's kind
Yeah,
of interesting because it,
it's rare.
yeah, you don't see suicides in a lot of movies. So, and
No,
here there's
no.
3 of them.
And they're a couple of them are rather dramatic. One of them is a guy taking what we think, like you mentioned, Tom, a cyanide pill to avoid being captured. Yeah, this is a trope used in many spy movies, of course, that follow. The other 2 are more poignant. A man takes his life in a very ritualistic way that is almost touching, really, when you're watching this thing. We don't want to give it away, but it's a wow moment.
This scene blew me away. I mean, it was just totally
Yeah.
amazing. And unlike the other 2 suicides, this
Mm,
suicide came from remorse for failing at his job. So
yeah.
it feels very different. It's filmed very differently. The emotion that comes out of it is very different. And I agree with you. It is almost touching because the other
Yeah.
2
Yeah. Yeah.
suicides
Yeah.
are more often included in spy movies as
Yeah.
they are about what happens when somebody gets caught. Here,
Yeah.
this is a suicide that wasn't because the guy got caught. So
Yeah.
to me, it was an amazing thing to put in the middle of this in the middle of this movie.
All right, the last and third suicide we see is a man taking his life with a gun, and his suicide is shown a little more starkly than we usually see. There is no gore here, but it's striking nonetheless. All right, another memorable scene happens just before the ritualistic suicide that we mentioned here. We see a man visited by ghosts. The makeup here is just
Yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely. It was kind of an interesting scene, but for what they were trying to portray, I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's different.
and as
Um,
we've mentioned, we do get a train wreck. All the wreck isn't shown, the crash isn't shown on the screen, and it has
right.
a
No.
very different feel to the James Bond or Mission Impossible
Yeah.
train wrecks that we've seen. We've kind of talked about this, so I just think it is a very memorable scene and sets the table.
Yeah, it does remind me, though, very much of the train scenes in Hitchcock's Secret Agent, which came out in 1936 with Peter Lorre. And it's very similar in one particular spot on that. So I think that was definitely influenced by this
Yeah,
movie
Hitchcock
as
seems
well.
to have gotten some influence from this movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, we have chases, like we mentioned. This is a spy movie after all, but this is the first non-war based spy movie. So the chases are memorable in that they hadn't been done like this before. Motorcycles chasing cars, we got trains, all fun stuff. And then finally, the aforementioned opening 2 minutes that we said, quite memorable with the assassination and the theft of the documents. That was really well done.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about the characters a little bit more. We've mentioned them at a really high level. Let's dig into them a little bit more because these
Mhm.
characters I think are positive to this movie. And it all starts with Hagi, the villain. I mean, pay attention to how he looks, his movements as he takes on the role of the villain versus the bank manager and what his third role is. I mean, this
Yeah.
is some really good acting. Now, Kleinroge was a master of using makeup and prosthetics to change his appearance. He's done it in many movies. In fact, he was in Metropolis. He was once called Germany's Lon Chaney because of the way he did this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And
That's good.
so, as the film's antagonist, Hagi is a masterful, sophisticated villain. And this archetype of intelligent, cunning, and often charming villain became a blueprint for future spy movie antagonists. and
Yeah.
influencing characters like Ernst Stavro Blofeld in the James Bond series. And this
Yeah.
happened in 1928.
Yeah. Pretty damn good, I think. Right. And I think the appearance and everything of this evil villain, certainly, I think you see the impact in the Bond movies with the villains, and especially the early movies. They have deformities, they have all this other weird stuff going on. Dr. No, everybody, Goldfinger didn't, but I think there was some influence there as well.
Well, you
So,
say weird stuff. Watch his hands.
yeah.
I mean, some of the shots of his hands are almost make his hands look grotesque, but they're just regular hands.
And the smoke going up through his face and the lighting, I mean, it makes it almost look like he's a
Yeah,
devil. I mean, it's really well
yeah,
done. That part is really, really
absolutely.
well done.
So this character Hagi is a very memorable character and one
Yeah,
that future antagonists have been based off of to some degree. Right now,
yeah,
all right. So now one fun fact about Kleinroge is that he had been married to Thea von Harbo. She left him for Fritz Lang. Still, he had main roles in 5 of Fritz Lang's movies. So his wife leaves him to go to Fritz Lang, and then this guy still is in Lang's movies. It's just kind of crazy. And von
that's how good
Harbo,
he
she
is.
was the screenwriter of Metropolis and Spione.
All right. Well, hey, there you go.
Right now, Sonia is played by Gerda Marus, as we've said, and it's her screen debut.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
She's probably my favorite character in Spione, and she has
Yeah.
to deal with trying to spy, fall in love, and deal with this evil guy Hagi. And she gives an excellent performance. And I was blown away when I read this was her first movie.
Yeah, I know. She looked terrific.
And this was 1928. She continued acting up to her death in 1968. And then finally, Willie Fritz plays number 326, the lead spy. Now, as we mentioned, we first see him in disguise as he's in deep cover, and it's a great disguise from what he looks like later in the movie. Still the same guy, but a total
Yep.
different feel to him. He has to take on the mission of trying to figure out what Hagi's trying to do. And then he falls in love with Sonia and has to deal with the fact when he finds out she's a spy working for Hagi.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
an interesting, memorable character. And the fact
Uh,
that he goes from this cover character to the natty dressed guy,
yeah,
again, we see again in future spy movies.
absolutely. And I must say that the last 8 to 10 minutes of this movie was very suspenseful. There had been action sequences that were cool and suspenseful moments before. That became hallmarks, of course, of spy movies and the spy genre. The film's ability to blend this tension with action influenced the pacing and style of zillions of
Oh
spy
yeah.
movies for sure.
Yeah.
And the camera work here and the overacting, because it is a silent movie, it works here because, well, it is a silent film. So what they have to work with, lighting, camera angles, and motion on the screen. So there you go.
So Dan, you're saying something positive here, even though it's a long movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm going to say one last positive thing here. I was impressed with the amount of detail in the
Oh yeah.
sets. There were lots of background items that added richness to the scenes, really. And this has also certainly influenced future spy movies to come. The Ken Adams of the world had to be keenly aware of this movie.
Well, and the cool
Now,
thing was they did this on a very low budget.
yeah,
Lang paid for this movie himself. So they didn't have a ton of money to do these sets, yet there's a lot of detail there.
yeah. Now, Spione, it's got a lot going for it. So I'm not going to be saying, hey, don't ever watch this movie. But if you have extra time and nothing else to do,
Oh,
watch it.
Dan,
But
if you are a
we've
fan of spy movies, it's a must watch.
we're giving you lots of good stuff here. Of course, there are some criticisms of this movie as well. So let's look at those and we'll give you our thoughts as well. The most complaints come in for this movie have to do with the length of the movie. Depending on the cut you see, it could be about 2.5 hours long.
And that's actually
That's
the cut we
saw.
recommend you see.
It is the cut you should see because the rest of it would really be hard to follow if you watch the choppy stuff. All right, given that this is a silent movie, you really have to pay attention and get past the overacting that goes along with the silent movie part. That said, I agree. This is a long, tedious movie. Tom, another problem that gets exaggerated is the fact that there are subtitles. Now, we are reading a 2.5 hour movie here. As I said before, I'd rather watch a movie than read it. But as I also said earlier, I thought there really actually weren't enough subtitles here. There should have been more.
Yeah, but so this is a 2.5 hour movie, but it is a silent movie.
Yeah.
And in a silent movie, there are generally less things put up on the screen than when we see a modern subtitled movie. The acting
Yes.
eliminates the need for some of the dialogue to be displayed. I mean, I get your point about the length of it, especially since it's a
Yeah.
silent
Yeah.
movie. And maybe a little bit more subtitling would have helped because there's a lot of points where the actors are talking to each other and we don't exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have liked to have heard some of those
Yeah,
words
but it
because it was probably
but
good
that
writing.
would have been more reading for you to have to do, Dan.
I know. I know. I know.
All right. So another complaint we sometimes see with this is the complexity of the plot. And I
Yeah.
believe the plot is complex, but not unnecessarily so. You do have to pay attention to the various characters. And I
Yes.
don't think it's too complex to follow. It is there. This is again, it's not as simple a plot as the general, but so you gotta stay awake on this one. And you do have to try to really pay attention as to who's bad, who's good. I mean, yeah, okay. Hagi's easy to figure out. Some of the other
Yeah.
characters aren't as easy, and I think this goes hand in hand with the length issue and the fact that this is a silent movie.
Yeah, I think you get a pretty good hint on what's going to happen with one of the main characters, though, during it. But it is complex. You do have to pay attention, and you can't fall asleep, which you can do during this 2.5 hour silent movie.
And
Though.
to
So,
give you a point is with the complexity is the Japanese guy that we talked about, played by the Romanian.
yeah,
I'm still not 100% sure what his character's
yeah, I
answers
know,
were.
I know, I know.
But
Me
then
neither.
again, that's Lang leaving things fuzzy.
All right,
So
yeah.
you got to pay
So
attention.
you, yeah, so you look at this movie, and hey, they had to restore the print of this movie because it's 100 years old. And so you got to pay attention which version you're going to be watching. As we said, hey, watch the 2.5 hour version by Masters of Cinema. Plus, again, we mentioned there are different scores under the movie depending on which cut you watch. So usually some parts are cut in the restoration process. The worst restorations have the movie looking old, but there are much more clear prints than some. That said, the version we found on YouTube by Masters of Cinema is a good restoration. And I thought the clarity of the cinematography I thought was
Yeah,
excellent in this.
I just wish it didn't have the piano score under it, but that's a different.
Yeah, yeah, that got annoying after an hour and a half. All right, we've
Well,
also
that means you had
seen
an
a
hour
lot
to
of
go
criticism.
being all annoyed.
I actually had to turn the volume down at some point.
Well,
I
it's
said, I haven't
silent.
turned
You're
this piano
just
off.
missing the music.
Yeah, it's a silent movie. We've also seen a lot of criticism about historical context. Now, I'm not sure I get that. The critiques have pointed to where we were in history when this was made and how that shaped what we see. Okay. We've also read that the technology was outdated. Yeah, by today's standards, yeah, yeah, the technology is outdated. So was 2001 Space Odyssey in 1968. However, this is 1928.
I
But
think
at
the
the time,
technology is pretty darn cool, especially
it
at
was
the time.
it was pretty damn
I mean,
advanced at the time.
there's a thing that displays on the wall to let him know what's
Yeah,
going on and stuff. I mean, that was pretty out there.
yeah. I mean, there's more modern ways of doing what they've done in this movie, but I don't think this criticism is fair. You're watching a silent movie that's over 90 years old. You should expect some of this without it being a distraction. All right. Whew. So these are the positives and the negatives of Spione. Is the movie worth 2.5 hours of your time? It's a long watch for me. But if you're a spy movie fan and love to see the roots of many spy movies to come, you should watch this movie at least once. Yeah, only
Oh,
once.
come
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
Dan.
only
It's a
once.
good
No,
spy movie, and maybe a second watching would have made it easier for you to.
I think we gave you a lot of good stuff to look at here. You do have to accept the age of the movie, and watching a silent movie is a very different experience than watching a modern movie. I had to watch it in pieces because I could not take 2.5 hours straight of this.
You are not a silent movie fan, so yeah.
No.
Right.
Spione is a true pioneering work, though, that has assuredly laid the groundwork for many conventions, techniques, and concepts of the spy genre. Its influence infiltrates numerous films and franchises, including the James Bond series, Alfred Hitchcock spy thrillers like North by Northwest, and more modern spy movies like Mission Impossible, and The Bourne Identity, and all those series as well. The film's blend of espionage, action, suspense, and sophisticated storytelling, and it is sophisticated for the time, as you said, continues to resonate in the genre, making Spione a crucial reference point in the history of spy cinema. So, you be the judge. We have given you the important stuff here. So, that's a wrap of our decoding of Fritz Lang's Spione. Let us know what you think of this one. This has been Dan
And Tom.
of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Subscribe to our podcast show and give us a 5-star rating on your app. That really helps us continue to do what we do. Tom and I appreciate you spending time with us. Thanks.